sell, or we'll make your life here impossible.
I remember just standing there, holding my coffee, looking at this woman. 6 months of certified letters, fines I didn't owe, my neighbors being bullied into tearing out docks their grandfathers built, and now she was on my porch, offering me $340,000 for land my grandfather bought with 11 years of a plumber's wages. She looked at me like I was the problem, like I was the one who didn't belong. Old flannel shirt, weathered porch, beat-up aluminum canoe chained to the dock. She saw exactly what she wanted to see. She never thought to ask why a man would drive 4 hours every weekend to sit on a porch like this, for 30 years, without ever once thinking about selling. She never pulled the deed. And that's where this story really begins. The cabin has a smell. That's the first thing you notice when you push open the screen door in late May. Pine resin baked into the wooden planks all winter, mixing with the faint mineral tang of lake water drifting up from the shore. The screen door itself has a specific creak, a 2-note groan that my daughter, Weslyn, mimicked perfectly when she was 4 years old, pretending to be a haunted house. That creak is 23 years old. Everything important in my life has a smell or a sound like that. My name is Garrison Aldcroft. I'm 51 years old. I grew up in Rutherford County, North Carolina, the son of a machinist and a school librarian who drove a Pontiac with a cracked dashboard until it finally died on Interstate 40 in 1994. I was not born rich. I want to be very clear about that because it matters to this story in a way you'll understand later. My grandfather, Elmore Aldcroft, bought the lake and the surrounding 340 acres in 1961 for a sum that sounds ridiculous now, $12,000, cash, from a timber company that had stripped the hills bare and wanted to unload the land before the tax liability grew. Elmore was a plumber. He saved for 11 years. He told my father the land would be worth more than anyone could measure someday, not because of money, but because you can't make more lakes. My grandfather was right, and wrong. It became worth quite a lot of money, too. I won't bore you with the full arc of how I got from a 2-bedroom house with a cracked dashboard Pontiac in the driveway to where I am today. The short version: I studied civil engineering, took a job with a regional infrastructure firm in Charlotte, saw early that private water use permits were going to become a licensing goldmine as drought cycles accelerated, co-founded a water rights management company in 2003, sold it in 2011, reinvested in a different play, and by 2017 the kind of number that appears on my net worth summary has 9 digits in it. I kept the cabin. I always kept the cabin. It is not a showpiece. The refrigerator is from 2002. The dock boards need replacing every 3 years because they warp in the freeze-thaw cycles. I love every warped inch of it. The community around Harwick Lake, that's the lake's name, named for the county surveyor who originally platted it, grew up in stages. In the 1980s, 36 cabin lots were carved out of the surrounding land by a developer named Pruitt, who bought parcels from my father through a lease-to-own arrangement. Those families built their cottages and docks and assumed, reasonably, that they owned what they could see. What Pruitt never fully explained, and what the county recorder's office would happily confirm for anyone who asked, was that the lake itself, and a 100-foot easement along the full shoreline, remained in the Aldcroft family trust. Always had. The dock permits, the water access agreements, the fishing rights, all of it operated under annual easement renewals that I had quietly let roll over, year after year, without drama, because that's what my father had done, and his father before him. Good neighbors, no need to make it complicated. That was before Beverly Stranton arrived. Beverly, 2 E's, she corrects people sharply if they write it wrong, moved into Lot 14 in 2019. She and her husband Clifton bought the property from the Drucker family after old Howard Drucker passed. Within 6 months, Beverly had run for HOA president, won by a margin of 4 votes, and immediately began revising the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions document, the CC&Rs, in ways that were creative, let's say, and arguably not legal. She added aesthetic compliance rules that targeted older cabins with weathered siding. She introduced a shoreline visual harmony ordinance, requiring anyone whose dock or boat equipment was, in her estimation, an eyesore to repaint, replace, or remove it within 90 days. She levied fines she had no legal authority to levy. She sent certified letters. She loved certified letters. The sound of a postal carrier's truck slowing in front of your cabin became, for many residents on Harwick Lake, a small moment of dread. My cabin, Lot 1, the original Aldcroft property, sitting at the northern end of the lake on a slight rise of land that gives you a view straight down the water at sunset, was the first target. It had weathered cedar siding, a dock that my father built in 1978, a beat-up aluminum canoe chained to a post, and a gravel drive. It looked, by Beverly's standards, like a cabin. That was apparently the problem. She sent the first certified letter in April of 2022. It cited 3 C&R violations: siding color, dock aesthetic, and what she called unsecured recreational equipment, the aluminum canoe. I read the letter twice, poured a cup of coffee, listened to the screen door creak in the morning breeze, and thought, I'm going to let this play out for a while. The first escalation happened fast, because Beverly was not a patient woman. Within 2 weeks of that initial letter, she had organized what she called a community standards walking tour. Herself and 4 other HOA board members, all of whom she had personally recruited, walking the shoreline road with clipboards and a digital camera, cataloging violations. I watched them from the porch. You could hear them coming before you could see them. Beverly's voice carrying over the water with the particular carrying quality of a person who has spent decades speaking to rooms that weren't listening hard enough. Lot 1 is the worst, she was saying as they came around the bend in the gravel road. It sets the tone for the entire northern end. You can see it from the Henderson's place, from the Bramblet dock, from the water. It pulls the whole aesthetic down. She paused at my driveway, looked up at me on the porch with a clipboard held to her chest like a shield, and gave me a smile that contained absolutely no warmth. Mr. Aldcroft, we've been hoping to discuss some improvements. Morning, Beverly. Coffee? She did not want coffee. She wanted compliance. She cited the certified letter, noted that 60 days remained on my cure period, and then, this is the part where it got interesting. She mentioned, almost casually, that the HOA had been in discussions with a real estate developer out of Asheville, a firm called Crestline Residential, about potential land consolidation opportunities along the north end of the lake. She said consolidation with the careful intonation of someone who had practiced that word. What she meant was, Crestline wanted Lot 1. Wanted it enough to be talking to the HOA about it. That's not how real estate works, legally. The HOA has no authority over whether I sell my own property, but Beverly had a way of making illegal overreach sound like neighborly advice. I said, huh, interesting. I sipped my coffee. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. She left a fresh packet of materials on my porch railing. Inside, a printed comps analysis of recent lakefront sales, a 2-page summary of Lot 1's compliance deficiencies, and a cover letter from Crestline Residential with a number at the bottom. The offer was $340,000. For context, comparable lakefront property on Harwick Lake, not the nicest lake in western North Carolina, but not a puddle either, was selling in the $600,000 to $900,000 range. For further context, my property included not just the cabin and the lot, but the original deed to the northern riparian zone, the primary inlet stream, and a strip of old-growth hardwood that a conservation appraiser had valued, independently, at over $1.2 million just for the timber easement rights. Not that Crestline would have known any of that from a county parcel search. Not that Beverly would have known any of that, because she wasn't the kind of person who went to the county recorder's office and read the actual documents. I did not respond to the letter. I did not respond to the follow-up certified letter, or the one after that. What I did instead was make a phone call to my attorney in Charlotte, a woman named Theodora Vance, who specializes in property law and who has, over the years of our professional relationship, developed what I can only describe as a connoisseur's appreciation for a well-aged dispute. Tell me everything, Theodora said. I told her everything. About the CC&R letters, the fine levies, the walking tour, the Crestline offer. She was quiet for a moment. Then, have you pulled the original easement recording lately? Not in a while. Pull it, because if Beverly's new CC&Rs are trying to impose shoreline aesthetic standards, and those standards create a compliance burden on property that is governed by a pre-existing county easement, yours, then she may have just handed you a preemption argument on a silver platter. Theodora has a dry, precise way of delivering good news that makes it land harder. Also, she added, the fine levies. She can't fine you. Her authority only extends to lots that signed on to the CC and Rs after 2019, and your lot, Lot 1, predates the entire subdivision. You've never been a voting member of the HOA. She's been fining a man who isn't in her jurisdiction. There's a legal concept here worth pausing on. When a homeowners association creates new covenants and restrictions, those rules only bind property owners who have signed or are bound by that specific declaration. A parcel that predates the HOA formation, particularly one with its own recorded easements and deed covenants, may be entirely outside the HOA's enforcement reach. It's called a non-member parcel situation, and it's more common than people realize, especially in older lakefront communities where the original land was subdivided in pieces over decades. Takeaway. If you're getting fined by an HOA and your lot is older than the HOA itself, pull your original deed and the HOA's recorded CC and Rs and compare the dates. You might not owe a cent. I pulled the easement recording. I also started keeping a log. Every letter, every clipboard walk-by, every date and time. You don't win these things in the moment. You win them in the paper trail. Summer arrived at Harwick Lake the way it always does. Overnight, or so it seems. One morning the water is still that cold gray-green, and the next morning it's blue, and the bass are jumping at the surface, and someone's kid is yelling from a dock 2 coves over. I was up there most weekends by June, and I started noticing things. The old Ketterman cabin on Lot 7 had fresh paint. Not because Wendell Ketterman wanted fresh paint, but because Beverly had levied an $800 fine, and Wendell, who is 74 and on a fixed income, couldn't afford to fight it. The Mabry family on Lot 11 had removed their vintage wooden dock extension, 3 generations old, hand-built, beautiful, because Beverly's shoreline ordinance declared it non-compliant. Their grandfather had sunk those posts, gone now. The smell of fresh-cut lumber from the replacement dock drifted down the lake and felt like a kind of erasure. I was getting angrier than I had expected to get. That's the thing about petty authority. It spreads. It doesn't just affect the person it's pointed at. It infects a whole community. In July, Beverly escalated. She filed a formal complaint with Rutherford County Code Enforcement, not using HOA authority, which she knew was shaky on my lot, but using county zoning channels, claiming that my dock was a structural safety hazard. A code enforcement officer named Deputy Inspector Flanders came out on a Tuesday morning. Flanders was a thin, mild man who seemed deeply uncomfortable with the situation from the moment he arrived. He walked the dock with a clipboard. He bounced on the boards a little. He looked at me. "It's solid," he said. "Honestly, better than most I see. Thank you. But I do have to file a report because a complaint was submitted. The report will say no violation found. I'd appreciate a copy." More paper trail. Another document in the growing file on my kitchen table, which was beginning to look like the evidence wall in a true crime documentary. Theodora was pleased. She had by this point done a full title search on Lot 1 and cross-referenced it against the HOA's recorded CC and Rs and confirmed in writing what we already suspected. I was not a member of the Harwick Lake HOA. My lot was never incorporated into their declaration. Every fine Beverly had sent me was legally void. Every enforcement action she had tried to initiate against me through the HOA was based on authority she simply did not have. But here's where it gets more interesting, and where Theodora started using phrases like, "This could get quite large," because when she pulled the full easement records, not just mine, but the ones governing all the shoreline access for every lot in the subdivision, she found something that Beverly and Crestline Residential had apparently not found, or had found and hoped nobody else would. The annual easement renewal notices, the ones that allowed every single dock on Harwick Lake, all 29 of them, on lots 2 through 31, to exist on land that was, technically, part of the Aldcroft family easement zone. Those renewals had a clause, a quiet, boring, one-paragraph clause that had been in every renewal document since my grandfather wrote them in the 1960s. The clause said, in plain language, that in the event the easement holder determined that the easement was being used in a manner materially inconsistent with the spirit of good neighbor access, the easement holder reserved the right to modify the terms of access, including dock placement, permitted improvements, and water use rights, upon 60 days written notice. In other words, if I decided that Beverly's HOA was running a campaign of harassment and coercive real estate pressure, using the community's easement-dependent infrastructure as leverage, which is what was happening, I had the contractual right, recorded in the county deed office, to rewrite the rules. Legal concept, plain language. Riparian easement modification clauses give the original landowner the right to change the conditions of waterfront access if the easement is being misused. If your waterfront access rights came through an easement rather than fee simple ownership, that easement can have conditions that the grantor retained. Always read the original easement document, not the HOA summary of it. The two are rarely the same thing. I had Theodora send a formal letter to the county recorder, memorializing our intent to review all easement renewals for compliance purposes. Just a filing, just paperwork, just the sound of a door swinging open in the distance that nobody else could hear yet. In August, Beverly tried a different vector, social pressure. She organized what she billed as a community values meeting at the Harwick Lake Recreation Pavilion, a wooden structure on Lot 17 that the HOA maintained, and sent formal invitations to every household on the lake, including mine. The invitation to me had a post-it note attached, handwritten in Beverly's particular script, all loops and determined pressure. Garrison, we really hope you'll attend. It's time to discuss the future of our community together. The word "our" was underlined. I went. Of course I went. I brought Theodora's associate, a young attorney named Satchel Pruitt, who was 6'2" and had the quietly intimidating habit of taking notes on a legal pad with the focused intensity of a man preparing a federal indictment. We sat in the back. The meeting was, in structure, a community dialogue. In practice, it was a 45-minute presentation by Beverly about the vision of Harwick Lake as a premier residential destination that required consistent aesthetic standards and aligned property investment. She showed a PowerPoint. There were renderings, actual architectural renderings, of what the north end of the lake could look like if Lot 1 was developed by Crestline Residential into what she described as a signature anchor property. The rendering showed a large, modern lake house, not a cabin, a glass and steel lake house, where my grandfather's cedar-sided home stood. The room was quiet in a way that told me not everyone was on board with this vision. Wendell Ketterman, still clearly irritated about his involuntary paint job, raised his hand. Beverly, did you talk to Garrison about any of this before putting it in a PowerPoint? We've been in communication. He's sitting in the back of this room, Beverly. She looked at me. I gave her a small wave. Satchel continued taking notes. After the meeting, 3 families approached me quietly, out of Beverly's earshot. The Kettermans, the Mabrys, and a retired couple named Durwood and Etta Fitch, who had been on the lake since 1987. All 3 had received fine notices in the past year. All 3 were frustrated. Some more than frustrated. Etta Fitch using language that I will not transcribe verbatim, but that was both accurate and impressively colorful. I told them that I was aware of some potential legal complexities in the HOA's authority structure, that I was working with an attorney, and that I thought things might be clarifying themselves soon. Clarifying, Wendell said. He had the skeptical squint of a man who had been a plumber for 30 years and knew what clarifying usually preceded. Dramatically, I said. Meanwhile, Beverly had also apparently been in contact with the Rutherford County Planning Office, attempting to have my property flagged for a pre-development review, a process that developers sometimes use to get an early assessment of a property's development potential. This requires the property owner's consent, which she had not obtained, and which the planning office, to their credit, noted when they called me to confirm the request. I said no. I also asked them to make a note in my file that any further planning inquiries related to Lot 1 required my written authorization. The planning office woman sounded tired, in the particular way of government employees who deal with HOA disputes daily. We get about 3 of these a month, she said. I believe you, I said. By September, Beverly had filed 4 more fine notices against other property owners, initiated 2 additional county code complaints against neighboring lots, for reasons that strained credulity. One cited a homeowner's wind chimes as a noise ordinance adjacent issue, and sent a second offer letter from Crestline, this time at $380,000. Still insulting, but at least they'd moved up. I did not respond. The paper trail was getting thick. The autumn leaves were starting to turn on the ridgeline above the lake, orange and red and gold, and I sat on the porch with a second cup of coffee and thought about my grandfather, who bought this land with 11 years of a plumber's wages, and about what was coming. The discovery that changed everything came, as the best discoveries often do, from a bored paralegal with too much time and a county records database that had recently been digitized. Theodora's office had been doing a complete title chain review, going back to the original 1961 Aldcroft purchase, forward through every recorded instrument, every easement modification, every deed transfer. It took 3 weeks. What they found, buried in a 1974 county survey amendment that had apparently never been flagged or indexed properly, was this. The Pruitt developer who had subdivided the lake parcels in the 1980s had worked from an incorrect boundary survey. The survey he used placed the private lot lines about 12 feet farther into the lake than the legally recorded Aldcroft easement permitted, which meant that a strip of land, 12 feet wide, running the full length of the developed shoreline, that every lakefront homeowner believed was their private property was, per the recorded county plat, part of the Aldcroft easement zone. Every dock, every boathouse, every lakefront improvement built in that 12-foot zone, and nearly all of them were, sat on land that was, technically and legally, mine to govern. This was not a weapon I wanted to use against my neighbors. The Kettermans, the Mabrys, the Fitches, they were victims of the same Pruitt survey mismatch that everyone else was. This was, however, a weapon I was now holding, completely legally, entirely legitimately, with full documentary chain of title, over the head of any party trying to use waterfront infrastructure as leverage in a coercive real estate scheme. There was a second discovery, less structurally significant but more immediately satisfying. Crestline Residential, the developer Beverly had been coordinating with, had a public investment filing from their 2021 Series B fundraising round, the kind of document you file with state regulators when you're taking on certain types of investors. In that filing, the company listed, as part of their target acquisition portfolio, properties along Harwick Lake specifically, including what they described as the anchor northern parcel, currently occupied by Legacy Landowner. Legacy Landowner, that was me. They had been planning this for at least a year before the first letter arrived on my porch, and they had listed Beverly Stratton's neighborhood advocacy as a listed due diligence asset. In plain language, Beverly wasn't just an HOA busybody with aesthetic opinions. She was a witting or semi-witting participant in a developer-backed pressure campaign to depress the value of my property, create compliance headaches, and manufacture a motivated seller situation. Whether she received any direct compensation for this coordination was a question Theodora said would be worth exploring. I called Theodora that evening. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. October at Harwick Lake has a specific smell. Wood smoke and cold water, and the faint diesel tang of the last boats being hauled out for winter storage, their trailers rattling down the gravel launch road. I spent most of that October at the cabin, not visibly doing much. Porch coffee, morning walks, a canoe paddle most afternoons. While behind the scenes, Theodora's office was building what she called the architecture of our response. The first structural piece was the easement audit. Theodora commissioned. The survey confirmed the 12-foot discrepancy across the full developed shoreline. The report was 38 pages. Theodora had it bound. She does that when she's pleased. The second piece was the HOA authority analysis. She drafted a formal legal memorandum, not a filing, just a memo for now, documenting the specific ways in which Beverly's enforcement actions against my property lacked legal authority. The fine levies, the code complaint filings, the planning pre-development inquiry. Each item identified, sourced to specific North Carolina HOA statute, with the specific legal defect annotated. This memo was not aggressive. It was meticulous. It was the kind of document that, if you handed it to a judge, the judge would nod slowly and start asking questions that made the other side of the room uncomfortable. The third piece was the Crestline connection. Theodora brought in a business litigation associate named Prescott, who had done securities work, to review the Series B investment filing. What Prescott found, spending 3 days reading documents that even the Crestline investors had probably skimmed, was that the filing contained language describing Beverly's community alignment activities as part of the acquisition strategy, in a way that, depending on interpretation, might constitute an undisclosed agency relationship, meaning Beverly might have been acting as a de facto agent of Crestline without disclosing that relationship to the people she was governing as HOA president. North Carolina has a statute, fiduciary duty. HOA officers owe a fiduciary duty to their members. Undisclosed agency relationships that create conflicts of interest with that duty are actionable. Legal concept, plain language. If an HOA board member is secretly working with a developer to push residents into selling, and that person doesn't disclose their relationship to that developer while exercising their board authority, they may have violated their fiduciary duty to the HOA's members. That's potentially a personal liability matter, not just a we disagree matter. It's the HOA officer's own assets that can be at stake. But the most important ally I found during that October wasn't a lawyer. It was Wendell Ketterman, over a cup of terrible instant coffee in his cabin kitchen, with the smell of sawdust from his workshop hanging in the air, and a terrier named Earl sleeping in a patch of afternoon sun. Wendell, it turned out, had kept records too, in a different way than mine. A spiral notebook, handwritten in pencil, every fine notice and every date, with his own terse notes in the margins. No authority, he'd written next to 3 separate entries. Ask Hatcher about this. Hatcher being a lawyer friend he'd called informally. Something's off. Wendell had not known what to do with what he suspected. He'd felt outgunned. He'd painted the cabin. I asked him if he wanted his money back. He looked at me over his coffee cup for a long moment. The paint or the fines? Both. Earl the terrier snored. The afternoon light went gold on the lake outside. Wendell nodded once, the kind of nod that means yes, and also means more than yes. It means I'm in. Over the next 2 weeks, the Mabrys signed on. The Fitches signed on. 6 other families, quietly, through Theodora's office, became co-complainants in what she was now calling the matter. She did not call it a lawsuit yet. She called it a comprehensive, equitable remediation filing, because Theodora has a gift for language that sounds reasonable right up until it doesn't. By November, the trap was built. We were waiting for Beverly to walk into it herself. She did not disappoint. In November, Beverly got a tip, not from us. We believe it came from someone in the county planning office who had seen the monument survey permit application, or possibly from the Hargrove survey crew who were seen walking the shoreline in October with equipment. Whatever the source, Beverly apparently learned that something involving property surveys and legal review was in motion because she accelerated. The first move was a smear campaign, conducted with the low-grade social precision of someone who had spent years in subdivision HOA politics. She began circulating, through text chains and a private Facebook group for lake residents, insinuations that I was planning to sell the property to a commercial developer who would build a marina and a bait shop and a parking lot, that I had been in secret negotiations with a national RV park company, that the Aldcroft Family Trust was in financial distress, and the lake itself might be sold out from under everyone. None of this was true. None of it was close to true. But it was effective enough to frighten the Halbertson family on Lot 22 into calling me to ask if their dock permits were secure. I reassured them. I also noted the date. The second move was an attempt to lock in the Crestline deal before our filing landed. Beverly, through Clifton, her husband, who had a real estate license he used irregularly, filed a preliminary purchase agreement with Crestline Residential, not for my property, which she obviously couldn't sell, but for a 20-foot access easement across the county road frontage of Lot 1, which she claimed the HOA held. The HOA did not hold that easement. No such easement existed. Clifton and Beverly, together, had submitted a transaction document that purported to convey a property interest that did not legally exist. This is called fraudulent conveyance, and it is a crime. Theodora was nearly cheerful when she called me. "They've given us a criminal referral angle," she said, in the tone of someone who has just found an unexpected parking space. "I was going to file civil. Now we can also go to the DA's office with a factual summary." The third move was personal. Beverly arranged for a woman from the Asheville Business Journal, not a reporter, but an editorial contributor who did real estate features, to write a profile of the revitalization potential of Harwick Lake, built around the Crestline residential project. The piece was published online in mid-November. It named me, by name, as a legacy holdout, whose reluctance to participate in the community's modernization was stalling a project that could bring significant economic activity to the area. The The piece included a quote from Beverly, identified as Harwick Lake community advocate, calling the north end of the lake a patchwork of outdated infrastructure that frankly undermines the property values of everyone who has invested in this community. I read that piece on a cold November morning on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, the lake steel gray and still. There was ice on the dock rail. The screen door was sealed for winter, no creek until spring. I thought about the word legacy. My grandfather, the plumber, who saved for 11 years. The cabin that smelled like pine resin and lake water. The 11 years. Prescott had already drafted a response to the Business Journal piece. A factual letter to the editor, with documentation attached, correcting specific false statements. We held it. Theodora said, "Not yet. Let them print. Let them commit to the narrative. You want them fully extended when the floor gives way." We scheduled the filing. We scheduled the HOA annual meeting, which fell in December, and to which, as Theodora had verified, I was, technically, entitled to attend as a neighboring property holder under North Carolina's open HOA meeting statute. We coordinated with the Kettermans, the Mabrys, the Fitches, and 5 other affected families, all of whom had been quietly coached on what to expect. We reached out to the Asheville Business Journal reporter, the real one, the news reporter, not the editorial contributor, and indicated that a story about property rights, HOA authority overreach, and a developer's acquisition strategy at Harwick Lake would be available for coverage in mid-December. The reporter was interested. We did not tell Beverly any of this. We just watched the calendar. December arrived with a sleet storm that glazed the gravel road and turned the lake the color of old pewter. I drove up on a Thursday, 2 days before the HOA annual meeting, and spent the afternoon stacking firewood on the porch. The solid, satisfying thunk of split oak, each piece fitting into the stack like a puzzle. The smell of bark and cold air. Physical work that requires no thought but all your attention. Good for the days before something large. Theodora's office had filed the comprehensive equitable remediation complaint 2 days earlier. Filed, not served. Filed means it exists in the record. Served means the other party knows. We had timed the service to arrive the morning of the HOA meeting. The filing had several components. First, a quiet title action asserting the Aldcroft Trust's rights over the shoreline easement zone, including the 12-foot strip identified in the monument survey, and seeking a court declaration confirming the recorded boundary. This was not a taking. We were not trying to evict anyone. It was a clarification. But a clarification with teeth, because until it was resolved, the title to every dock structure in that 12-foot zone was clouded. You cannot sell a property with a clouded title. You cannot get a mortgage on it. A quiet title action is, in property law terms, a document that politely walks into a room and sits down in a chair and makes the room very uncomfortable. Legal concept, plain language. A quiet title action asks a court to formally declare who owns a disputed piece of land, clearing up any competing claims. Once filed, it creates what's called a cloud on title for the other party, meaning no bank will lend money against the disputed property, and no title insurance company will issue a policy until the case is resolved. It is, financially, a freeze button. Second component, the fiduciary duty complaint against Beverly, individually, as HOA president, for the undisclosed agency relationship with Crestline. Beverly Stranton, personally. Her name on a filing. Third component, a factual referral memorandum to the Rutherford County District Attorney's Office regarding the fraudulent easement conveyance document that Clifton had filed with Crestline. Not a complaint, technically, just a memo with attached documentation. But a memo delivered to a DA's office has a way of prompting phone calls. Fourth, letters to all 29 other lake property owners from Theodora's office, informing them of the monument survey findings and their rights in the easement zone, and offering, on behalf of the Aldcroft Trust, to resolve the 12-foot boundary issue through a permanent easement grant, at no cost to the homeowners, in exchange for their withdrawal from any HOA enforcement action against Lot 1. This was the offer that separated the community from Beverly. It told the Kettermans, the Mabrys, the Fitches, and every other family, we are not your enemy. The instrument of your problems has a name, and it's not Aldcroft. On the evening before the HOA meeting, I took a long walk down the gravel road along the lake. The sleet had stopped, and the sky had cleared, and the stars over Rutherford County were, There's no better word for it. Extravagant. Wendell was out shoveling his walk, and we talked for 20 minutes, our breath fogging in the cold air. Earl the terrier sat on the porch and watched us with professional skepticism. Wendell asked if I was nervous. Not really, I said. She's going to be furious. Yes. Good. We shook hands in the cold, and I walked back to the cabin. The fire had burned down to coals. I put 2 more pieces of oak on it, watched them catch, and went to sleep early. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. The Harwick Lake HOA annual meeting was held on a Saturday morning in December at the pavilion, and it was standing room only, which was unusual, because HOA annual meetings are normally attended by the same 6 people who attend every meeting, and the rest of the community who forget it's happening. Word had gotten around. Not through us, through the families we'd been working with, quietly, over the past 2 months. People came. Folding chairs were unfolded. Someone brought a plate of brownies. The Asheville Business Journal reporter, the real one, was parked in the back with a notebook. She had been told only that there would be a significant development in the Harwick Lake property dispute. Beverly arrived in the pressed blazer, color-coded folder under her arm. She set up a small podium. She was visibly confident. Not the defensive confidence of someone who expects trouble, but the forward-leaning confidence of a person who believes she is about to complete a long project. She had a presentation prepared, more Crestline renderings, I assumed. At 9:07 a.m., a process server walked through the pavilion door, located Beverly Stranton by asking a woman in the front row, and handed her a legal envelope. Beverly took it with the automatic courtesy of a person who expected it to be a vendor invoice. She glanced at the return address, Theodora Vance, Esquire. She opened it. The room had that specific quality of silence that happens when a lot of people are pretending not to watch something while actually watching it completely. Beverly read the cover page. She read the second page. Her face did not collapse all at once. It deflated, slowly, like a tire losing pressure. The smile first, then the shoulders, then the set of her jaw. She looked up and found me. I was sitting in the 3rd row. Satchel was next to me with his legal pad. Theodora was on my other side, in a dark blazer, reading something on her phone with the unhurried calm of a person who has done this before. "What is this?" Beverly said, not loudly, almost quietly. Theodora looked up. Theodora, with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 3 months preparing every word she was about to say, walked through the findings. The survey discrepancy, the easement zone, the HOA authority analysis, showing that every fine levied against a non-member parcel was legally void. The Crestline investment filing, projected on the wall from a laptop, with the key language highlighted. The fraudulent easement conveyance document. Beverly's attorney, she had called one apparently, because a man in a sport coat who had arrived at 9:05 a.m. and sat in the corner was now very actively on his phone, tried twice to object that this was not the appropriate forum. Theodora agreed that the courthouse was the appropriate forum, and that the courthouse paperwork had been filed 2 days ago. Then I stood up. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I do not give speeches, but there were 50-some people in that room who had been living under a year of fines and threats and coercive pressure, and some of them had painted their cabins against their will, and some of them had pulled out docks built by their grandfathers, and I wanted them to hear it plainly from me. My name is Garrison Aldcroft. My family has owned the lake since 1961. I have no interest in disrupting anyone's life here. That's not why we're here today. We're here because a concerted effort was made to use HOA authority, county processes, and a developer's money to push a family off land they've held for 63 years. That effort is documented. Those documents are now in the court record. To every resident who received an improper fine notice, those fines are legally void, and my attorney's office will be contacting each of you individually about recovering those payments. To the families whose dock structures may be affected by the survey boundary issue, the Aldcroft Trust is offering a permanent shoreline easement, at no cost, to every affected lot. You will be made whole. That offer has nothing to do with this lawsuit. It's just what neighbors do. Wendell Ketterman started clapping. He was not an effusive man. It meant something. Beverly left without presenting her Crestline materials. The color-coded folder went with her, unopened at the podium. The reporter's notebook was full. The brownie tray was empty. Outside, in the cold, I stood by my truck for a minute before getting in, looking down the length of the lake. Steel gray, quiet, old. my grandfather's lake. The ice on the dock rail caught the low December sun and held it. The legal resolution took 8 months, which is fast for litigation of this complexity, and which Theodora attributed partly to the strength of the documentation and partly to the fact that Crestline Residential, once named in the fiduciary duty complaint, retained their own attorneys, who moved immediately to distance themselves from Beverly's activities. In March, Crestline settled separately, paying a sum that I donated entirely to the Rutherford County Land Conservation Trust. In May, the quiet title action was resolved by consent decree, the court formally confirming the Aldcroft easement zone boundaries and issuing the permanent shoreline easements to all 29 affected property owners, recorded in the county deed office. No docks were removed, no families were displaced. 63 years of good neighbor access, now formalized in writing. Beverly Stranton resigned as HOA president in January, before the consent decree was entered. The fiduciary duty complaint was settled in June with a payment by Beverly's homeowner's liability insurer. These situations sometimes have insurance coverage that even the defendants don't initially realize exists, which covered the improper fine reimbursements for all affected homeowners, with about $40,000 to spare. Clifton's real estate license was referred to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission for the fraudulent easement filing. As of the recording of this story, that review is ongoing. Beverly and Clifton listed Lot 14 for sale in August. They moved to Mecklenburg County. The $40,000 in surplus, after every improper fine was reimbursed in full with interest, became something I hadn't planned, but which felt right when Wendell suggested it over coffee in October. The Harwick Lake Scholarship Fund, administered through the Rutherford County Community Foundation, providing 2 annual college scholarships to graduating seniors from the county's public high schools, with preference given to students from working class or trade worker families. The kind of families that used to buy a lake for $12,000 and save for 11 years to do it. The first scholarships were awarded in the spring. The recipients, a young woman planning to study environmental science, a young man entering a civil engineering program, came to the lake for a small ceremony. They stood on the dock that my father built in 1978 and looked out at the water, and I thought about Elmore Aldcroft, the plumber, who saw something worth keeping. The Harwick Lake Conservation Easement, which I recorded with the state in the same month, permanently protects 280 of the surrounding 340 acres from commercial development in perpetuity. It doesn't affect the cabin lots. It doesn't affect anyone's dock. It just means the ridgeline above the lake, the old-growth hardwood on the north slope, the inlet stream where the bass spawn in April, will be there when Westland's kids come up to the cabin, and their kids after that. The cabin's refrigerator is still from 2002. I keep meaning to replace it. The screen door still creaks. I will never fix that.
Beverly came to that porch with a folder, a smile, and 30 years of getting her way. She left with a lawsuit, a criminal referral, and a for sale sign in her yard. But here's what I keep thinking about. It wasn't the legal victories that mattered most. It was Wendell Cattleman, 74 years old, getting his $800 back. It was maybe family, knowing that dog, the one their grandfather built, was with his own hands, is protected now, permanently, on paper, in the county record. That's what Beverly never understood. She thought this was about one cabin, one holdout, one man she could pressure into a corner. It was never about the cabin. It was about every family on that lake who'd been told to shut up and comply. If you ever had someone with a clipboard and a title tell you that you don't belong somewhere, you know exactly how Garrison felt on that porch. The question isn't whether people like Beverly exist. They do. They always will. The question is whether you know your rights when they show up at your door. If this story hit close to home, share it. Someone you know needs to see it. And if you want to see what happens when a city council member tries to condemn a family's business using an ordinance he wrote himself, not knowing they've been operating under a grandfathered license since 1952, subscribe, because that one's coming next. And trust me, he didn't see it coming.